correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, folks, and this week it's going to be a fun one. I'm here today with my friend Steve, as always.
Howdy.
And we are joined extremely long distance, even via the internet, from someone who I believe we managed to pry away from his Vegemite to come talk with us. So GM Hooley, if you would say hello.
Hello, Gaming Nation. Yes, boys, you have dragged me away from my Vegemite. Vegemite is better on toast with cheese, but that's a bit of a trick for the beginners. I have not used the Barbie, nor have I used any shrimp lately. So that's pretty much covered all of the stereotypes for Australia as I open up a can of Foster's. That stuff tastes terrible.
I've actually had Vegemite, so
very good. Very good.
Can't say it was the tastiest thing, although I'm told that you all tend to apply it much thinner than most of those of us who are uneducated and try it.
Pretty much. I mean, most people, when they try it, they sort of take it in a big spoonful, and it's just like, and that it's never going to happen. It's just disgusting. But,
Yeah.
It's not too bad on sandwiches and whatever else. But yeah, mixing it with anything else, I just can't do.
In any case, yeah. Well, we figured we'd have you on since we're kind of, making the rounds, and you're rather well versed in RPGs and so forth. So we figured we'd have you on, and we also figured that while we had you, we'd have you promote your own show because you're also part of the D20 Podcast Network.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run, as a co-host with my friend GM Chris, we run the Forge, a Genesis RPG podcast, which, by the name, you can tell we talk a lot about the Genesis RPG. We focus on the sort of the behind-the-scenes side of things of the game, how to design your own settings, talk about the rules a little bit more, and have a deep dive into those sorts of things. We also talk to special guests from the industry that can help people with their own work and get them involved in the Foundry, which is a great place if you are into Genesis, which if you're not, why the hell not? The Foundry basically has a whole heap of settings, whole heap of rule supplements, and whatever else that you can download straight off Drive-Thru RPG. So yeah, that's us.
And your show, to be honest, while you focus on Genesis, I've mined a lot of stuff that just applies to RPGs in general, listening to you guys.
Yeah.
Or if you want to write stuff, I remember the layout episode you did with Katrina Ostrander was like mind-blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big eye-opener for me as well. And I mean, Katrina's been in the industry for quite a few years now. And anytime that we have any of our special guests that come on from, whether it be FFG or whether it be one of the editors who's worked for FFG, just tapping into their brain and learning how things are done. We've all been there back in high school or whatever else when you're opening this book and you just think, who are these magical people that are somewhere that are like writing this stuff that I can have so much fun with? That they're real people, they're real dudes like us. That and dudettes, if you want to look at, that's very, very bad English. Anyway, like Katrina, it's we talk a lot about content that isn't necessarily just applicable to Genesis. I mean, I do a bit of writing for, or have done for FFG for Legend of the Five Rings, and I've also been doing some stuff for Edge, which I can't talk about. But we'd like to cover a whole heap of stuff so that it's not just applicable. So I'm glad you picked up on that, and I'm glad it's helped your games, which is great.
Well, I think that thing, though, to go off on a tangent before we even get started on the main topic, but I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't really get with RPGs is that so much of what you pick up doesn't apply to just one game. Once, like I've said before, once you learn how to run a RPG, it's
Mm.
so much easier to run any RPG.
Absolutely. I mean, with being a game master, a game master in Call of Cthulhu is really no different than being a GM for Genesis or for DM and D&D. The basics are still the same. You've still got player management. You've still got, managing the table, making sure that the story points are getting hit so that the PCs can continue on. And realistically, you just gotta learn a new system. That's all that it is. So I agree with you 100%, 100%.
Yeah, that's been one of our core tenets for a long time, is that our goal is to help with getting that core toolkit together for new or even experienced GMs so that they can transfer that between games. Because just like you said, it doesn't really matter what game you're playing. It's the core storytelling is going to be the same. It's just that you have to have understanding of the system itself. And that's been something that we've really pushed for a long time, because that's something that I've had conversations with people that they're like, I don't know if I can run Call of Cthulhu. I'm like, well, have you DM'd before? Yeah, you can run Call of Cthulhu. Like,
One of the big differences I think that most people sort of back away from when they've GM'd in the past is that theme of the setting that they're playing in. It's there is a little bit of a difference between, a dungeon crawl and a horror mystery. So, that's the reason why I think that people back away from that as much as possible, because they are afraid to, well, can I do this story justice? So yeah.
and I think a lot of that comes to, if you have a passion for that type of story, like if nobody's pushing you, oh man, you have to run Call of Cthulhu, even though you're not a horror fan, if nobody's pushing you to do it and you have a passion for that type of story, you can do it justice, because you
Yeah.
know what you want to see in that type of story. So just apply it.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that people are afraid of. And I think that any GM who's out there who has been asked to run a game that they're not necessarily familiar with, and that's not just the rules, but the genre, that they challenge themselves. There have been times where, when it comes to writing, for example, my weak point is equipment. So when anybody asks me to design equipment or look at gear, in any way, shape, or form, I'm going, oh, I don't think that I can do this justice. But at the end of the day, I have to push myself forward to really get that product completed. And I think that the same sort of applies to GMing. Just treat it as a challenge. If you're GMing, people are going to appreciate the fact that you're GMing anyway. Let alone there's that meme that goes out where this person who's stranded on an island, and they put in big letters "looking for group," and all these planes are flying past them. But as soon as they put GM willing, suddenly all these people are coming to rescue them. It is the case. People, for whatever reason, don't want to take that next step into GMing. And I think that that's an important thing, that it's almost like a rite of passage for a player to be GMing. I've been fairly lucky in that regard. I took that leap way early in the piece. And so I've pretty much been, always GM, and I'm a terrible player anyway. Um, I think that if you take that leap, you're going to be more satisfied. Your players are going to be satisfied anyway because they're playing, and it'll be a lot of fun. I think, even if you stuff up, it's still a lot of fun.
Well, and the thing is too, and like specifically, like I had this conversation on our Discord, I don't know, last week, I think. Someone was talking about wanting to run Cthulhu, but they don't feel comfortable with the lore. And I said, well, here's the thing specifically with Call of Cthulhu is the game about weird, unnatural stuff.
Mhm.
So who cares about the lore? It's just weird, unnatural stuff. It doesn't have to make sense.
This is very true. It's kind of like in D&D, and I know that, you guys aren't necessarily a fan, and don't worry, neither am I. Although I play D&D, I run
Oh,
D&D for people.
we do as well.
Yeah,
But,
we play and run it, so
but the thing is that when it comes to, D&D, when people say, "Well, why does this happen?" Well, magic. It's kinda like with Star Wars, "Well, how is this possible?" The Force. And you don't need an explanation other than that half the time.
I think one of the things, and I can understand where somebody would get tripped up by Call of Cthulhu because, and this isn't ragging on Call of Cthulhu as a book, but when you get a book, and I talked about it a little bit when we had Sugi on, but I've gotten to this point in my GMing career, or my like game playing lifetime, where I'll buy a book not necessarily because I care about the setting. Now, I will buy books for their setting, and don't get me wrong, but I'll buy a book not necessarily because I care about the setting, but because tonally or mechanically this fits a need I have. So, like
Mm,
Twilight 2000, that's a really cool setting. I don't care so much about that. More of I want a book that's going to run a war story really well.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
what that's built for.
mm,
Call of Cthulhu does dark and brooding really well. Perfect. I do a lot of not necessarily specifically the setting, but more of I can grab this and throw majority of the setting out, but keep the tonal notes and play it the way I want to play it.
yeah.
And that's where I'm at in my like I don't know what you want to call it, lifetime gaming career, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
Um,
makes sense.
But look, I've been gaming for coming up to 35 years, and I still hate running horror. Mainly because I'm not a big horror fan, but I'll run thrillers and mysteries until the end of time because I love intricate webs of deceit and blackmail and whatever else to make a really good drama. And that's only because I've watched bucket loads of Neighbours and Home and Away as a kid. But for those who don't know, that's a soap here in Australia. Uh, so, but like a show, for example, like Once Upon a Time,
mhm.
that was we've just binged watched the whole of that. I watched like seasons 1 to 5, I think, and then for whatever reason didn't manage to get back to it. But the kids really liked the first couple of episodes, so we've binge watched all 7 seasons over the course of about the last 6 months. And it's that sort of drama is in a magical setting, but there's all sorts of this person's related to this person and this plot twist, and that's the sort of stuff that I love to do.
Mhm.
But if I was asked to run a horror, I think that I'd still love to do it, but I wouldn't necessarily feel 100% comfortable because that's not my zone. But yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think horror possibly is one of the more challenging genres to run just because
Mm,
horror is different to everyone as they experience it too, you know?
Yeah, to elaborate on that a little bit, what I find horrifying, like graphic horror doesn't hit me as hard. It's the existential horror, but somebody might find graphic horror very terrifying. You know,
mm,
it there is horror is such a, my friends are movie buffs, and so we've had serious discussions about what separates a thriller from a horror movie. Well, that's just a designation in the rule book. Like a thriller is just a horror movie for different horror fans. You
mm.
know,
Yeah. Look, one of the things that sort of when it comes to horror, I think, is a very individual thing. That it's something that might be horrific to one person may not be. A good example of that is that I can talk about dead bodies and things like that until the end of time because I used to be a police officer years and years ago, and there isn't a thing that I don't think that I haven't seen from the bad end of society. But if I was to bring that into something with someone who's never been exposed to that, it doesn't affect me, but it may affect them. And this is the line that I think you walk when it comes to horror. And I think you have to be very, very particular before you run horror in either a session zero or whatever else to find out what people's limitations are. because there are some things that may trigger people that you just have to be really mindful of.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we've all got those experiences that we don't ever talk about, unless you're actually seeking help in that regard. But there is going to be things in your life, even if you have dealt with them, that are going to trigger some memories that may add to that horror. Now, if that doesn't affect you and you raise that at the time, great. I'm certainly going to be using that to an extent, being mindful of everybody else at the table as well. But it is one of those things that you just have to be very, very careful for, I think.
I agree completely, and safety tools are one of the big things that we advocate for. Is at the table, if there's something that crosses a line, X cards are great to have. Or setting up before you even get started. Hey, this is too far for me. I don't want to deal with any of these type issues. We've started implementing those into our games. Now, granted, I think with us it's a little bit different because we've played with the same group, or like I play with my friends, or we play with friends of ours, so it's a little bit harder for us to go. The lines are already been defined. But if you're playing with a new group, defining those lines is very important. And even if you're playing for an existing group, you're changing genre completely. Defining a line not to cross is something that you really have to do.
And this is why I think that, and I know that this was, throwing back to your first episode, but when it comes to session 0, these are the sorts of things that need to be raised every single time that you start, especially with a new group, as things are opening more up, as we sort of get on top of COVID in particular. You're talking to new people because your other groups may have broken down or whatever else. But also in the online sense, because there's a lot of stuff that gets missed out, especially if you're just doing it via voice, because you're not actually able to see people a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So you are going to have instances where you've just got to be really, really careful of that. And this is something that I've had plenty of conversations about with people who've wanted to run convention games. That a convention game, because it's a one shot by nature, you've got to be that extra careful and make sure that when it comes to your blurb that you might have in your event catalog, that it lists those things that may be that are potentially going to be problematic to your audience, because the last thing you want to have is that there's going to be something to do with dismemberment or something like that, and somebody's actually been through that and they're not aware of it. So you've really got to, and I guess this goes back to another episode that you guys were doing, talking about expectations. And I know that that's something that I've gone on a lot about, is you have to set the expectations at the start of the game, so that everybody's on the same page, basically.
Yeah, that really can be such a big thing, to make sure that everybody's did you all know what you want out of a game? It's so much easier to then actually get it.
Yeah, agreed. That was a big tangent.
Welcome. Hey, you've listened to our podcast. You know that's life here.
Yes.
That was, we don't acknowledge it. All right. You're breaking the fourth wall on this show.
The original name of the show was Tangent Land.
Yeah.
But in any case, I think we had talked about this briefly, that we were going to try and talk about kind of like, I don't know how to say it the best way, but maybe how do you pick what game you're going to play? And I mean that in a context not just of, be it so you want to play we'll say cyberpunk, and I'm just pulling that out because just so happens that just yesterday I finally picked up a hard copy of Cyberpunk Red.
Right.
And sitting within arm's reach of where I am right now, I have Cyberpunk Red, I have Cyberpunk 2020, and I have Shadow of the Beanstalk.
Good choice.
But how do you go about, or how would one go about, you want to play whatever genre, how do you go about picking what you want to play it in?
As far as that, I think that when it comes to cyberpunk in particular, there are certainly more systems out there that play with that genre as well. I mean, if you're into what is it called? It's not called Battle Master. I just refer to it as Roll Master. I just refer to it as
Chart Master.
all that. Yes, where you need some sort of degree just to start your character. But you've also got GURPS as well that has some cyberpunk type supplements that you can go out and buy as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of it, I think, is going to be dependent on two things. The first one is your familiarity with the system. Because if you're familiar with the system, that's more time that you can spend getting together the story. And I think that that can't be emphasized enough. And Steve, the other night I was talking to you. Pick which one. But for me, it's a case of that I will spend 20 hours, 30 hours setting up the campaign for a start with all the locations and all of the NPCs and what relationships connect to who. And that's after session 0. So there may be a fairly lengthy time between session 0 and actually playing where I'll set up the world and do all the world building. And then I will take, depending on what system I'm obviously running, I will then take less time preparing for each session
Mm-hmm.
so that I can concentrate on the story that's going on and how what the PCs do is going to affect everybody else in the campaign. So if I'm familiar with that system, it's going to make it easier to do that. But to go back to your question, I think that there are certainly games that do things better purely because of their mechanics that are contained within the game. The best example of that is Call of Cthulhu. And there is another example, and I'll get onto that in a tick. But Call of Cthulhu, it has that sanity rules that's hard boiled into it, that makes it so much better. That if the PCs are coming across something that is horrific, to harken back to our previous conversation, that is going to be an easier thing to implement when it comes to running the game and what happens to people as they slowly go insane. Um, Another example of that would be the original version of Deadlands, that you've got poker chips and playing cards as part of your resolution of mechanics and just the way that the game flows. That to me is thematic.
I actually remember that from when I was in college. Somebody had the original, and Deadlands has always kind of intrigued me, but I really want to find the old version, not the modern Savage Worlds version.
Yeah, the original version used this whole sort of it bought into the whole thematic play. And I know that when we played it on a small round table, and we were encouraged to wear big hats and whatever else, not as a LARP, but just to add to the theme. And it was it allowed people to get into their roles and get into the story more so than that it goes down to something that you guys talked about in an earlier episode about buy-in, that they're enabling themselves to get into that theme. And when you're playing in cards, it almost like you're playing poker. And so again, you're getting into that theme of steamboats and whatever else. So yeah, they're the two sort of prime examples that I think that when it comes to for horror, Cthulhu is it. When it comes to any sort of westerns, I think that Deadlands is certainly the most appropriate.
I obviously want to get it on a table and actually try it. I do want to try Dread at some point, which I don't know if you're familiar with Dread. Dread is the one run off of a Jenga tower.
Oh yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I wonder, and I don't know if, I hope it's good, I should say. And I hope it's not just a really gimmicky game, because if it isn't, then it might go as my go-to for suspense and horror, because Jenga is a suspenseful game as it is. And adding that extra twist to an RPG is a good, I don't know, I like that. I think that's interesting. But I have a player that keeps bugging me about wanting to try Dread, and we will get it on a table at some point. It's just a matter of I need to get it on a table and see, because Call of Cthulhu does do the sanity things very well, but I wonder if Dread does suspense better, just because you get to that point where you have everything's riding on one piece.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Look, there are a couple of systems that do that whole dread type thing quite well. That's one of them,
Mhm.
obviously, and another one that does it is the 2D20 system from Modifius.
Oh,
They have
yeah.
some of their games. They have that. I'm trying to think what it's called. Heat, where as you sort of progress, as you make mistakes, the it adds to heat. And even Genesis does something like that as well. That and it's one of the themes that appears in the expanded players guide, where they talk about this heat mechanic, where instead of like when you roll a despair, instead of it having some sort of effect then and there, the GM can say, "Okay, no worries, thanks," and they'll
Yeah.
like just hold that back. And as that progresses, things sort of get worse and worse, and eventually the PCs know that something really bad is going to happen when they don't know, because they don't know when the GM is going to trigger that. And I think that adds suspense to the table as well.
That kinda goes to that, clock mechanic that, Forged in the Dark games are so fond
Yes,
of.
yes,
A version of that, I guess, in a way.
yep, absolutely. The other big thing, and this is really sort of doesn't talk about system, but and I touched on it briefly there when it comes to Deadlands. Probably the best Call of Cthulhu game that I've ever played was we were all of our characters were going to we had to stay overnight. You know, it's that old trope. Had to stay overnight in this particular big mansion, which was obviously haunted, which we were obviously going to die, and but we still went anyway because that's what we do. But the way that my friend set it up, who was running it, is that he had an old shed in the back of his house, and he cleared it all out, put in a gaming table in there, put candles around the place, and we played in this old shack in the middle of the night with, he put some spider webs and stuff like that up as well. And that added to the theme as things sort of were creaking because there was a tree nearby, and it was just creepy.
Mhm.
And I think that if you can achieve that with like your surroundings, your physical surroundings when running these sorts of games, and there's a whole heap of stuff that can come into play there, whether it be music, whether it be sound effects that you can get from, a plethora of places online. But you've also got the physical surroundings, how you set it up. Are you going to run the Cthulhu game by candlelight? If that's your thing, or if you've got dimmers, bring everything down, providing you're not sight impaired, which is great. No,
Well, yeah. What's that
so,
one game, what's it called? 10 Candles or something that you play?
ooh,
I've heard of it, I've never
yes,
e
yeah.
seen
That
it,
you've
but
got 10 candles, and as things go bad, one candle gets put out, and eventually you're left in.
yeah, and I think that, though, that's a thing because look, we've all been around people that go, "Well, you can play anything with System X." And, look, Hooli and I mean, look, I've got my Genesis core book, over here next to the desk. Genesis is an amazingly versatile system, and I think Genesis handles more things well than most other system engines do, and I think some of that is that it is designed very much to give a cinematic feel to things, and because film and television media is so prominent, that's the way a lot of us imagine it, and
Yes.
so I think that how do you wanna say it, lends itself to that system being so versatile,
Mm.
but I think, like, the argument you'll hear all the time, "Well, there's a 5e adaptation of that." Well, to go to horror, look, I know Sandy Peterson wrote his Call of Cthulhu 5e conversion.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna buy it. I have 5th edition Call of Cthulhu sitting in a box. I have Delta Green. If I wanna play that game, I'm running one of those 2 engines. I am not running it in 5e D&D, period.
That system is not made for much
Uh,
other than what that setting is, and
it's the reason why I was so, so, so upset when I heard that, they were doing Stargate in D20 5e. And I'm
Mm.
just going, "Oh, really?" That would have been perfect in Genesis. But, look, I'm always gonna refer back to Genesis because I've said this time and time again, I've played in X number of systems, and I've bought a whole heap more that I probably will never ever get to play, but, I've flipped through them just to try to get, some sort of rules or, some sort of thematic thing out of it, whatever that is. But I think I'm going to retire on Genesis when it comes to RPGs. And the other thing to remember with Genesis is that some people pick it up and say, "Oh, this isn't really the full rules." Well, no, it's not, because it's a framework. It's like picking up GURPS, and I've played in GURPS, and I've got my degree in what algorithms or whatever, just to be able to do characters. But that's just the standard rules. There's other stuff that you have to look at or create yourself or buy if you want to go down the path of, looking at fantasy. You'd look at Realms of Terranoth. If you're looking for that cyberpunk, you'd be looking at Shadow of the Beanstalk. But Genesis isn't the only game that does these sorts of things well. And it also depends on whether you're and as you progress through your career as either a GM or as a player, there are going to be games that's out there that have no systems at all. One of my favorite is Fiasco.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
And there
Fiasco's
is no
great.
dice rolling other than the dice rolling that you have to do at the start and at the finish and at the end and in the middle. So, it's just going to go down to those two things that I mentioned before. Is that the first one is familiarity with the system, and the second one is, does it have rules in it that are going to cover what it is that you need to successfully run that genre or that theme?
Yeah, well, I think that, like, as we touched on before, what tone, what things you wanna emphasize, like, when we talked with, Sugi last week, he was talking a lot about Cortex and how he's a big fan of Genesis, but he really likes Cortex too, and he said the thing is that, like, Cortex mechanically seems to focus much more on the inter-character reactions as opposed to the characters interacting with the environment.
Mm,
And I thought that was, like, how some games mechanically put the focus more in different areas, and depending on what kind of story you wanna tell, that can affect how well it works for what you wanna do.
yes, I 100% agree with that. In my opinion, Genesis doesn't necessarily handle social interactions as well as it should. I know that I think it was Chris Markham who's just put out a supplement which deals specifically with this topic to try to address some of the issues that comes to social encounters, because social encounters are such a big thing that but if you've got, using Genesis as an example, it's got combat covered so many times over because of, it's a solid system. It has a lot of talents and whatever else along with it. D&D is the same. It's got combat down pat. But when it comes to social interactions, it's a falling down. I agree with him that Cortex, which I have a copy of, it's a great system. And if you haven't got it, go out and buy it. It's well and truly worth it. All that you need is polyhedral dice. You don't need any special dice. Um, so it's more accessible, I guess, that way. There's a lot, if you want to start going into the background of Cortex, there's a lot of other systems, a lot of other settings, sorry, that are out there that you can play that in. Some of which are in Kickstarter, I think, as well. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I believe they're also, at least according to, JT and Kirby, there's a program akin to the Foundry in the works if it's not formally up yet.
Yep. Yep. I don't know a lot about it, but I know that it is on there. And if you haven't, I don't think you guys have had JT on the program yet, have you?
No, we
Not
haven't.
as of yet.
Yes. If you want a Cortex, yeah, he's the one to have. He's great.
Yeah, it's kind of on the list.
Mhm. Absolutely.
But yeah, like, it just, like I said, I think that a lot of people lose, and I think the other thing is most games, again, going back to what we mentioned way back earlier in the show, most games mechanically aren't nearly as complex as you think they are at first glance. You
No.
know, I mean, with some exceptions, like you mentioned Rollmaster,
Good.
the newest version of Warhammer Fantasy is relatively complex.
Right.
But to a certain point, what I guess I'm trying to say is I don't think people should be frightened of trying a new system because it has some element that's going to add a lot to the story that you want to tell. For example, like I don't know Pathfinder nearly like I know Dungeons and Dragons, other than to know that it's a close cousin to D&D 3.5.
Yep. Yep.
And my contention has always been that it is very difficult to run an effective horror game with that engine because it is entirely too difficult to make the characters feel vulnerable consistently.
Mm.
And so I think that if you want to run a horror game, you're going to get a better payoff if you take the time to learn some other system, be it Call of Cthulhu or something else,
Mm.
Genesis, whatever, than trying to shoehorn it into Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, which you already know, but mechanically de-emphasize the things that you kind of want emphasized for the story you're telling.
True. One thing on this point that it took me a little while to get over, and I think that Keith Capel, who is a prolific writer when it comes to stuff for FFG, and great guy as well. One of the things that he taught me is that any new rules that come out are just written by some dude or dudette. So it's not this big magical thing, and I know as kids we expect that these RPGs are designed by these gods of gaming that we don't know, because back in my day, and I'm assuming older Steve, you would agree with me that there was no such thing as the internet when it came to looking at new stuff that was coming out, and suddenly
Yeah.
all of a sudden it just appeared on shelves, and you just go, wow, this is like amazing, and how did this come to be? But when it comes to new rules, it's just, and I've written rules for Legend of the Five Rings that some poor kid has basically picked up and gone, who did this? It's great. I wouldn't say it's great, but
Mhm.
it's but it's these rules just appear. So I think that when we start talking about that there are systems that are going to handle what you want to do in your game better than others, those others can have rules created for them. It's just going to take a lot more work.
True.
So if you've got your head around 5th edition D&D and you know the ins and outs, and you think that you can design some sort of mechanic that is going to cover X scenario that you know is going to play a big part in your campaign, then you go right ahead. Make sure it's play tested first, or at the very least, when you're running a game for the first time, just tell the players, look, this is something that I know that we're going to be using a lot of. I've designed this. I don't know whether it's going to work. Is everybody okay that we just run with it? And as long as you've got buy-in from the players, that you can go and do whatever it is that you want to do with any system. It's just going to take more work. And I think what we're talking about here is the best way of finding the tools to run the game that you want without doing all the work. Would that be right?
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think, yeah, go ahead. If you have more to add.
No, I'm done.
I think that's one of the biggest things is I see a lot of effort and care put into converting games to 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and I've expressed my complaints with that system and whatever. I get it. If it's your favorite thing in the world, that's great. I'm glad that you enjoy that. My thing of it is that I think there's better systems. I think a lot of times when things are converted, unless it's hard fantasy, I think there's better systems that can do that than Dungeons and Dragons. And I get that some people just don't want to play those other systems. I understand
Well,
that completely. But
it's also a case that accessibility to these systems.
right.
I will go on about Genesis until the end of time, but it's not an incredibly accessible system. because currently it's going through a state of flux because it's gone from one company to the next. And therefore, the products aren't always available. In other words, you can't necessarily find the dice that you need to play if you're in a place where you can play around the table at the moment. If you're doing it online, there are so many different tools out there that you can run with. And I know that you guys, that's how you ran the live play with Chris.
Yeah.
That you don't need dice. You just need a PDF of the rules or a hard copy of the rules if you can find it. But this is where I think Drive-Through RPG comes into its own, because there are so many different games which are out there. And I know that you guys with Game of the Week, that you're encouraging people to go and find different games that may suit their ideas or just for something new to try. And I think that plays a big part in it for me anyway, that with those systems that, yes, there are going to be some systems out there that do really, really well with whatever, task that you need them to do. But, if, as you say, if D&D is your thing and you don't believe that anything else should be playing, that everything can wrap its head around 5th edition, well, go ahead, just somebody may have done the work. Look on Drive-Through RPG. If nobody's done the work, well, you've just made a rod for your own bat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I'm not trying to tell someone that, "Oh, you're having fun the wrong way." Don't take me wrong, but like, like there's a point where you can dig a hole with a spoon and you can dig a hole with a shovel.
yeah,
It's just a whole lot easier with a shovel.
yeah, that's right. And that's right. And look, there's plenty of people out there who have done that and have made it readily available. So it's just a matter of hunting through Drive-Through RPG to find whatever tools you need to run your game. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. I think that if it's out there, use that. Don't make more work for yourself. It's a big enough job, running a game or playing in a game as it is. Don't make things difficult for yourself. So
Yeah, and as someone who's dabbled in system design, it gets to be one of those things where you start going, "Well, I did that. Oh, now I need to do it. Now I need it. Now I need it." And pretty soon you're like down this rabbit hole of things, and well, I just wanted to tell this cool story about this,
yeah,
you know, and like part of the thing, with Game of the Week was just a way to, because I think there's a lot of people out there, who, for lack of a better, just don't realize that games aside from D&D exist.
Mm. Yep.
I was fortunate in the first game I ever played was actually West End game Star Wars.
Mm.
Um,
Oh God,
and then
system so much.
I had a roommate in college who had a copy of Rifts,
Right.
which I fell in love with the setting
Mhm.
and couldn't find anyone who wanted to run it. Now I know why, but I wanted to play it, so I said, "Well, okay, I'll run it." And so I ran Rifts for a couple years in college, and then I got into a 5th edition Call of Cthulhu game, again, in college through, assorted friends. And we
Yep.
played a little bit of Cyberpunk 2020 and a little bit of 2nd edition D&D and a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And so for me, D&D was kind of there's that game that, well, when we all get together and what are we going to play? Everyone knows how to play it.
Mm.
Where I see a lot of people now that come at it as, you mean there's role-playing games that aren't D&D?
Look, I think that goes down to how they've been exposed to role-playing games in the first place. If they've started their gaming career at a store, which was not something that we had the advantage of back in the day, that for us in Australia, most people who learned that there was things other than the game that they're currently playing was through a catalog that we used to get in the mail. It was free, and it was from a place called Military Simulations. And it listed every single board game, every single role-playing game, every single miniatures game that that you could, that existed. So when it comes to the accessibility, that it's if they've been at a store, they're going to know that there's other RPGs. But if it's just a case that when I first started, I started on Top Secret, not SI, the original Top Secret. I didn't even start with D&D. I didn't know that D&D existed. But as soon as my friend told me that there's this game that you can play make believe, and it's just rules, and he gave me the whole concept of what role playing games about. Then I sort of fell in love with the idea because I'd been playing with Star Wars figures and whatever else. Because I'm an only child, so I'd been playing with Star Wars figures in my head for ages about big stories and whatever else. So when it came to actually putting some sort of mechanics behind it, so you could tell really great stories with a group of people, that fascinated me. Now, I didn't know that anything else other than Top Secret existed until such time as there was a form in the back of the Top Secret box set that said, send here if you want to know more about other role-playing games. Other role-playing games? What's that? And that's when we got introduced to D&D and things like that as well. So, it's there are going to be people out there, yes, I 100% agree, that are not going to be exposed to anything else other than D&D. And if you look at podcasts, and if you look at the likes of Critical Role, you would think that in the role-playing scene that's all there is. But you hope that, and I kind of wish that they would promote a little bit more about other RPGs to help people along with their careers. But I know that that they are well looked after by Wizards of the Coast, so they may have some contractual arrangements there.
I think with them in particular, you're starting to see them promote other games. I mean, they've recently played a non D&D Diablo game. They played a Doom game a while ago. They played Deadlands a while ago as well. Which is good steps. I mean, that's nice to have.
Well, they've also started their own publishing company.
Right.
Have they?
Yes.
Darrington Press, I believe it's called.
Oh, that's cool.
And I for me, speaking a little bit to when I started playing, I knew of Dungeons and Dragons. I knew of that, and I started going to a local gaming store, and the local gaming store I went to only sold Dungeons and Dragons. Steve knows this. It was more of a card or miniature store at the time than it was focused on RPGs. And really the only thing they had was Dungeons and Dragons. And then as I played that, I'm like, well, there's got to be more than just this. Like, and
has always been a gateway drug. Let's face it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's it's promoted that all that you need is Player's Handbook and your right to play and a set of dice and your right to play. Based on your comments from a couple of episodes ago, I would agree with what you said, that that's if you're a player. But if you're a GM, that's a different story.
Yeah, we have a whole, hey, go back a couple episodes, you'll find a whole episode of a rant on that.
But it's true that it goes down to the accessibility, and a lot of the smaller publishers, and we're talking about people who aren't Modiphius, aren't Wizards of the Coast, aren't FFG, or aren't even Edge, that there's going to be those niche games that are absolutely fantastic. But a lot of the time, people are only going to find them through osmosis because somebody else in their gaming group has decided that they wanted to pick up that game. So, but I guess if this is the first time that you're ever listening to a podcast, I want to know how you found it. But if this is the first time that you're listening to a podcast about role-playing games, go out and search just role-playing game, not Dungeons and Dragons, and you will find a whole plethora out there that that may suit your needs. And I'm always going to, as I said before, I'm always going to point people towards Genesis. But there's still a lot of genres that I don't think it would cover very well. It's very much a film blockbuster sort of feel to it because it's based off Star Wars. It's things didn't sort of, unless we're talking about episode 1. But things happen really faster pace. And that's what you want. If that's what suits your theme, if you want action and adventure, then a game like Genesis is something that you can certainly grab onto. But if you're looking for more sort of social interactions and stuff like that, before the show we were talking about Good Society, which is an RPG which has been designed by two fantastic and talented writers and artists from Australia, and it's all about social interactions. So yeah, there's something that covers everything, but don't limit yourself in any way to just the one system that you're familiar with.
Yeah. I mean, I've found more games, even some of them just, fan written creations, go to Google, type in whatever RPG, be it, I don't know, Manifest, the TV series. You might find something. You never know. Type in Matrix RPG. There's a fan made Matrix RPG out there. It's been out there for years. I downloaded it a while ago. I still have yet to read it, but I have a lot of games like that. But like seriously, like you said, Google it. Google, put in whatever it is and the letters RPG, and you'd be surprised what you can turn up.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Just whatever theme you want, whether it's superheroes or whether you want and that's an entire show topic on its
Gosh,
own.
yes.
Superheroes RPGs. There's so many of them, it's not funny. But whatever theme or trope that you're going for, and RPG at the end of that, and yeah, you'll find something. There'll be something out there
Mm-hmm.
that is going to potentially. It may not handle everything because there are just as many fantastic games out there. There's some really terrible ones out there too. Let's not forget that. But there's certainly going to be the elements that you're looking for to run a particular game. There's certainly going to be a game out there for you for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed completely.
Well, you know what time I think it is?
Yeah, I think it's that time.
Game of the week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right. So who's going first this week?
I say Steve.
Go for it, Hooli. Yeah, you got this.
All right, so my game of the week is something that isn't available on Drive-Thru RPG. It is one of my favorite RPGs that I've ever played, and I've only played it 3 or 4 times, but it is the Marvel Superheroes Saga Edition. Now, this was one that originally there was, I think it was called Birthright, D&D Birthright, where there was a game, it was under this Saga system, which uses a set of cards to play the game. The Marvel Superheroes did something exactly the same. There was a few books that came out as a result. And they really took the notion of if you want to create a superhero, you can. But for the most part, here are all the stats of all of the superheroes that come from the Marvel universe. And it's a very simple game. It plays really quickly. You can even generate characters if you want to really quickly as well, just by choosing some cards. And you can have a lot of fun with people around the table. And it's another example of a game that is very systems light, but you can do some really crazy things with it. And, it's more about those super heroic moments that you really can't explain with any rules. You just use the cards, and it's really, really good. It's hard to get a hold of. I know that there are some other ways that you can, which I'm not going to promote, but places like Noble Knight Games, for example, you can sometimes get a copy, or at least if one comes in, if it's not available, because they list all games and they just say that it's not currently available. But you can get a notification if somebody comes in, because people send their secondhand games to them all the time.
Yeah.
And you can get that notification that somebody's come in and you can buy it. Sometimes it's a little bit expensive. If you do it on eBay, it goes upwards of $150, $200. That's ridiculous. Don't pay that. But, the guys at Noble Knight, for example, do a good deal on them. So, that's my game of the week, and it's great.
Yeah, cool.
Very cool. I think I'm going to go next.
Okay.
I'm shouting out a game that's not quite out yet, and that's not something we normally do. However, When we were talking about Modifius and talking about that 2D20 system, I went to their website to look at the 2D20 system a little bit more, and I'd completely forgotten that they were producing the Dune RPG. And that is set to come out. They say Modifius says April, Amazon says May 14th is when the physical copy will be out there. I love Dune as the Frank Herbert sci-fi Dune novel, and having a role-playing game from a publisher like Modifius to play in that world is something that I am 100% down for. So that I'm excited for that. That's going to hit store shelves soon, and that's definitely going to be in my hands soon, because that's a game that I'm always down for. And it's a world that I just love playing in. Like, I just love the ideas of that world.
The 2D20 system is a really good system, can I just say? It is another one that's designed by
Jay Little? Was it Jay Little?
Jay Little. I almost said Stuart Little then. And he'd probably kill me for that. But yeah, Jay designed the Star Wars / Genesis system, and he was the one behind the 2D20 system, and it's really, really good for a system that doesn't require special dice. It's great. So yeah, it's I'm familiar with the Star Trek and Conan 2D20 games, but I've also seen Infinity as well, and the quality of their product is insane. So is the price that you pay for the books, but that's another issue. But no, I agree with you. That's awesome.
Got any more on that, Steve?
No, that's what I got. What do you got?
Well, I was going to spotlight something. I actually got an email from the proprietor of one of our local gaming shops about this the other day, and I got the chance to actually flip through it a little bit when I was at the store yesterday when I picked up Cyberpunk Red, and it's not something I don't know that it's in my alley necessarily, but it sounds really interesting, and I don't know of anything else that does it, so I wanted to bring it up. It's a game called Lex Arcana, and what this is, let's call it Roman Empire alt history mixed with fantasy. It's like effectively Rome never overexpanded and then crumbled. It actually consolidated and like stayed a thing. And they tie a lot of fantasy elements into it and whatnot. So, like I said, I guess the best way to describe it would be fantasy alt history Rome. But like I said, this is called Lex Arcana. Actually, as we're speaking, the PDF is on sale on drive-through for just under $17. There's also a free quick start, which I downloaded because I want to take a look at it just to see what it's about, as far as the system and so forth. But, I thought it was one of those things that it's a very specific genre, and I would think if you wanted to play in this genre, to set it up in any other system would probably be a lot of work, and here someone's already done it. And the other thing that I found out about this is apparently it is in its second edition in English, but apparently this has been a game for a number of years in Italy, and it's just more recently been translated into English. So it's not actually as new as we think it is.
That sounds so cool. I love Roman times. I think that would be amazing. I'm going to go and check that out. Thanks, Steve.
They've got a free quick start. You can well, technically it's pay what you want, but the quick start, and like I said, then there's a bunch of source books and stuff out for it. But yeah, like I said, I don't know anything about it mechanically and so forth. But like I said, that's a special enough genre that I think, it fits with what we were talking about tonight.
Absolutely, yeah, that sounds really, really good.
So
yeah, I think with that, we want to thank you for being on.
Yes.
Thank you for coming on to our show, and
it's been a blast.
Yeah, it has been a blast. And we do want to remind everyone to be kind to each other and get out there and play some RPGs. Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/meandsteverpg. Thank you, and be kind to each other.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
Yes, I'm ready to go. You just point me in the direction, and I'll talk forever.
Oh, well, you have been hanging around Chris too long, haven't you?
Pretty much. That's the reason why we do 4-hour podcasts.
Oh,
Because we can talk.
because this is going to be a little bit of a podcast, so I'll be right back.